This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 391, the December 7th, 2018 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker once again. Nice rhythm of shows here, several in a row from the bunker. Feel like we get in a nice rhythm when we do that, as opposed to our usual crazy wanderings. And nobody wanders crazy than the first guy I'm about to introduce. He is the regular co-host of this program. He is back on the planet Texas. He is the people's champion. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
This is really weird being able to see you while I talk.
Yeah, that's right.
The new dimension.
We're doing something different. You're not missing anything. Not that you were missing anything anyway, but you can't watch us. But for the first time, just because we all happen to randomly turn our cameras on, we are looking at each other, which is kind of fun. Now, I'll still be looking around, furiously trying to figure out what to talk about next and doing other host-like things. But it is kind of cool that I have my 1980 USA hockey jersey on, Kenny Morrow, and his number 3 on the back, and JK can check it out. I saw him wearing his customary hat and a purple and gold shirt. I was wondering if he was doing some consulting for the Breeders' Cup on the sly. Does your deal with DRF allow that?
The suitcase, all the stuff was dirty. I just found something that was hanging up and threw it on.
You look like you're ready for a garden party or something. Next up is our special guest. He would be on the short list of the most frequent guests in the 391 episode history of this podcast, an accomplished tournament player. You also probably know him as a brilliant Twitter follow and also the founder of PublicHandicapper.com. He's Public Handicapper's Scott Carson. Scott, what's up?
Hey, great to be here. And I just realized as I was getting ready for the show that we are celebrating our 20th anniversary of Public Handicapper next year.
Phenomenal.
2019. We've been going since 1999.
That's great. When is the anniversary? I want to start planning ahead the column I'm going to write now, and the podcast we'll do now.
I think it'll be the Kentucky Derby.
Okay.
Will be the first race. Maybe the Kentucky Oaks. I have to look to see.
But I mean, the PH Challenge, the biggest contest, the 6-month marathon that gives away all manner of fabulous prizes, the centerpiece of the year, that traditionally starts with the Kentucky Oaks. So what better way to kick off the 20th anniversary season?
Yeah. That's it. That's, so now we have to promote it and get a marketing team and
let's do it. I'm into it, man. Let me help. I'm all about it. Very interesting contest for those who don't know. All the Public Handicapper contests work. They sort of share DNA. And the way the contest works, it's the only handicapping contest that I know of where you can go backwards. Let me explain what I mean by that. You start off with a bankroll of 0, and each $2 win wager you make either hits, and then that gets added back to your bankroll, growing it positive, or if you miss, you take $2 away. Am I describing that correctly, Scott?
You are, and the idea behind it is it's a little bit anachronistic these days, but back in the old days, the newspaper would have the Public Handicapper, and I always thought the Public Handicapper should be deducted $2. They would only show the Public Handicapper's winnings,
right? And
you'd have to figure it out to see if they were actually showing a profit. So we decided to be hardcore and make that show up.
I love it.
I'll tell you what, this camera thing's not going to work for me because when you guys start using big words, you're going to be able to see me Googling. Anachronistic.
Anachronistic.
Something at a time. Like you're watching a movie about gladiators, JK, and the guy's got a Timex. That's an anachronism, something that does not fit in time. That's a good one, and a good usage by you, Scott. I have a question for you, a couple of questions for you, JK, starting off with this format and how, if at all, I assume you've played. I don't think you've ever made a like concerted run on Public Handicapper. I assume you've played on it at some point. But just theoretically, losing the bankroll, how, if at all, would that change your approach in a handicapping contest, a mythical handicapping contest like Public Handicapper?
Well, Public Handicapper, the problems I've had with it are the same problems I've had with fantasy football. Is like, I'm just traveling too much. So like I'm not in a rhythm on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm in some other hotel, some other place. And so I just forget. I've set my alarm, do my Public Handicapper. That helps sometimes. But, I think there actually used to be a contest. I think Surfside is that way, where you actually lose your money if you miss. Scott would probably know better.
Yeah, because you start by loading a card with certain money, so it does go. The balance does go down. I believe that is correct.
I mean, I think it's the same idea that we talk about on the show all the time. It's like the power of $4, like my willingness to take a favorite. I think it even increases more the value of being able to do that in a situation where you're going to lose the $2. The $4 or whatever if you don't hit. So it's really the power of $8 or right. Whatever if you're willing to take a short price horse.
Scott, in the history of this contest format, is there a prevailing strategy that wins? When you look at the live bankroll format, you see so many of the time it all comes down to the last race. In the Public Handicapper format, does it skew towards players who play long shots? Does it skew more towards players who have a super high strike rate? What do you expect to see, or does it all just depend?
Well, it's kind of like almost any contest that you enter, whether it's the NHC, anything where there's like 10 or more races. You have to get a few of each. You're not going to win with just a pure strike rate. You're going to win. You're going to have to get a few bombers in there, but also a lot of, solid. There can be some small ones in there too, but nobody wins by just hitting like 4 bombs. They have to hit a couple of bombs or one bomb, and then a bunch of double digit 10-to-1s, that type. Makes
sense. Absolutely. The contest that just started, we should tell people about that. Ideal world, we would have had John last week. We didn't do that. The Winter of Our Discontent contest has already begun, but it's only just begun. So players starting this week, and answer this honestly, how big of a disadvantage is it to start in week 2, Scott? I mean, are people up against it if they didn't play last week, or does the fact of losing that money mean that off the bankroll mean that it's not such a disadvantage?
It's actually an advantage to start this week.
Explain.
because most of the people lost money last week. So you're starting at 0 in the standings. You're ahead of most people already. The nice thing about the winter contest is we only require you to play 12 races out of 40 races. So because people are busy, it's holiday shopping. Jonathan's always traveling. Not that I expect Jonathan to play the contest, because it's hard when you're playing all the other contests to also you might not have any Golden Gate races on your menu, and then you gotta get PPs and you gotta handicap, and it's time consuming. But yeah, I mean, I was 0 for 4 last week, so now I'm at -8. And if I was starting right now, I'd be at 0. So it's actually an advantage. And the other thing that I might point out about Public Handicapper, if it's the main challenge, it's only 60 races required, plus all the including all the Breeders' Cup races. So you have to do those, but you can skip races and imagine that it's a kind of a kind thing that we did. We deduct $2 if you pick a loser, but if you hate the race, you can skip it, except for Breeders' Cup.
What do you think of that idea, JK, the ability to pass in a mythical format?
I think it's great. I mean, it's kind of what we get to do on NHC. I mean, it's the same idea. You don't have to play a race. That first race at Aqueduct on Thursday, when we all get out to Vegas and there's a 1 to 5 shot in there, you don't got to play the race. You can skip it. So I think that definitely resembles what we all do as horse players. Before I hopped on the call, I looked at the early pick 5 at Aqueduct. I looked at the early pick 5 at Gulfstream and decided that neither one of those were opportunities that gave me any type of edge, and so I'll just pass on them. And so I think that when you can do that in a mythical contest format, it represents what we do every day.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I assume that's part of where that idea came from, Scott. Let's go over the basics of the rules to play. PublicHandicapper.com. I don't think I've said this yet. Absolutely free to play. Every week, Scott and his team of editors pick 4 races that, as we've said, you can pass, but you have the option to make your $2 mythical win bet on those 4 races. And at the end of there are 3 different ways you can win, if I'm remembering this correctly. There's the entire contest, and then there are weekly prizes. And I believe in this contest also there is a monthly prize. Scott, tell us what the prizes are for those 3 things.
All right. Well, the first thing, and I have some interesting data to add to this, but the current contest, the top prize is $100, and it's a 2-month contest. So that's a lot of work for 40 races. That's a lot of work for $100. But that just goes to show you that most people are playing it not for the money, but just because they enjoy playing it. And I always say Public Handicapper keeps people in the game. So if you're too busy that you can't do anything else, you can play the Public Handicapper races. And if you're interested in that, and if you're interested in your lifetime record and such, it's good. So for this contest, it is a top prize of $100. And then if you pick 4 races, pick 4 winners any week, you get a 10-card DRF PP package, which is great, right? And and then if you win the monthly, you get a 30-day unlimited, which is like striking gold.
Yeah, that's pretty good stuff. I mean, you're talking about good cash value and get your data taken care of. But I think you raise a good point, Scott, about the community element of Public Handicapper that also comes from the fact that you are free to write your own analyses of these races and also read what other players have to say. That, to me, if somebody was looking, and there's a lot of listeners to the show who I think fall in this category based on some people I've met at EquestriaCon and places like that, people looking to really raise their game, to get more involved, and to meet more people in racing as well. For some players, it really depends on how your brain works, but for some players, writing up those analyses is going to really help you crystallize your thoughts, make you more accountable in a way, prevent as much, we all do it. Lazy handicapping sometimes. You're not going to be lazy if you're writing something that's going to be out there in the public eye. And then reading what others have to say, I would say with some of the good players on there, you can't help but learn something. And even in the case where you read something that you disagree with, that can still be really valuable just to get you thinking about things in a different way, or maybe finding a place where you think there's going to be value because some of the money in the pool is going to be represented by people thinking along the same lines as the person you don't agree with. There's a lot of potential benefits as far as that goes. Over the years, what have you observed, Scott, in terms of the Public Handicapper community?
Well, interesting things like if I hit 3 winners, which doesn't happen very often, but if I hit a couple nice shots, I get emails. Now everybody has my email because they just have to reply to the Public Handicapper email and be like, Scott, wow, that was an amazing call, but congratulations. And so I have a connection with people that way, but I also get emails from people saying, hey, like, can you forward my info to, West Side Mike or whatever? There's different people on there. Because I would love to have a chat with them. And sometimes it's horse racing related, and sometimes it's just life related. Like they seem to have something in common. So there's not very much interaction because aside from analysis, there's no forum, but that there's community there because if you do anything, you hear about it. If you just pick 4 losers, you're not going to, nobody writes you and says, well, that sucked.
See, once JK gets more involved, that might change. I think the trolls will come out for JK. But I do think, and I know this from experience, that I've met people in Saratoga, say, and they have a connection to Public Handicapper, and then all of a sudden you feel like you know them. I do feel like it's not as direct as if there was a forum, like you say, but you have that opportunity to take these online relationships and put them into the real world. And Jonathan, I know for you, that's been something, meeting people in the game, peers, like-minded individuals, is something that's caused you to step your game up big time. And this might be a way for others to participate in that. How important, JK, is it to have people to talk about racing with to you?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to so much do it through the internet. I was fortunate enough with the tour and my mom working 28 years in America to be able to fly around and get to racetracks. And I know that's a little bit harder for other people. I met Eric Bialik sitting at the Hawthorne contest. I saw someone that wasn't 40 years old, and I went and said hello to him, and we've been the best of friends ever since. Nick Tamero was an email where I met him. I know Nick and Travis and Pat Cummings all met on a message board. So, yeah, I mean, I think that when you can expand your horse racing network, I think that's one of the biggest things as growing as a horse player. If you're sitting at your computer by yourself, telling yourself bad ideas and no one's there to help you get to the bottom of those bad ideas and to rectify those bad ideas, it's a much harder game. When you do something in a contest and you can reflect upon it with people whose opinions you appreciate and respect, it really does help with the growth as a horse player, where you can bounce off ideas and the Kentucky Derby betting challenge. I'll never forget. I woke up that morning and I was going to absolutely toss Toinette. And I was lucky enough, this is like another part of it, I was lucky enough to be on Steve Bick that morning, and Nick and Bick both liked Toinette. I used her, and if I didn't use her, I would have lost my entire bankroll. So surrounding yourself with people with good opinions can definitely pay off.
And Public Handicapper, definitely a way to promote that. JK, I love how you're arbitrary, and I think you're getting a little old to do this now. You're arbitrary, like old guy age, 40? Come on, man. I've expected you to say 60 or something.
Well, no, I mean,
Scott and I are both on the wrong side of the line here.
Well, I was 33 when I met Eric, so that helps a little bit. And I still get carded sometimes when I need to get a beer, so I try to convince myself that I'm younger than I am.
Scott, one of the people who one of your better friends in racing, from what I can tell, is another frequent podcast guest and one of the editors on PH, our man Chris Larmy. Did you meet Chris through PH, or did you meet him in real life and then recruit him for PH?
No, I met him through PH. Usually, I get requests to be editors. Like, people will email and say, "Hey, I'd be interested in being an editor sometime." And usually, I don't respond to those. I mean, I respond, but I pick, as editors, I usually pick people who write as without being prompted.
Sure. So
Chris was one of those people. And he was good. He's always been good on Public Handicapper. And I will further agree with Jonathan that aside from meeting people through Public Handicapper, I've learned a tremendous amount just by hanging out and talking to other handicappers. I've learned a ton from Chris. Learned a lot from Paul Sherman. I listen. If Nick Tamero is on. If he's on Steve Bick and it's a big race, I'm going to listen to him, get his opinion. And I listen to the pod, whenever I can, I listen to the pod for your guys' opinions. So I do think that that's a really essential part of improving your game is getting other opinions, not just opinions, but other opinions from people who are successful on the tournament circuit.
Especially when you can hear the whole thought process is going to tell you so much more than just, reading the pick per se. It's I love that aspect of it. That can really, because that can be something that pays on the day of the race in question and can pay going forward when you can add another tool to your toolbox, another weapon to your arsenal, as it were, and have a chance to use that going forward. I want to follow up a little bit, Scott, about the project we talked about the last time you were on here, your $50,000 challenge from Saratoga. How has your play been since that experiment? Did it have any long-lasting effect on the way you approach racing? Was it positive? Was it negative? Reflect on that experience for us a little bit.
Well, I'd say the most lasting effect has been that I play very few races now. So, sometimes I only play one race a day. I might look at 2-3 cards and only play one race for the whole day. And that's by doing that, that's how I've managed to, you know, I haven't exactly been killing it, but, you know, aside from that big loss, I've been doing fine, you know, and the reason is because I am not forcing myself to do plays. So, you know, naturally I put myself in a position where I had to act. I couldn't say, like, for 3 days on Twitter, I couldn't say, no play today.
Right.
Yeah, no play today. You know, like, people were interested in, you know, what I was doing that day. So I'm not only that, but there was a time limit. And, you know, if you're going to win 50,000 and there's 2 weeks left in the meet, you better start cracking. So what I learned really is not to issue that challenge. I'm thinking about other potential challenges, but one like that, no, I don't think I'll ever do that again.
It's interesting. So we talked last time about how the challenge helped you in terms of aggressiveness, and reflecting on it, talking about the need to bet in fewer spots. It starts to sound to me like the successful poker strategy of being tight and aggressive, you know, really choosing those spots, but then attacking them without fear, the way we talked about a little bit in one of your previous appearances. Does that resonate with you? Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I was in another contest where it was an ROI contest a few weeks ago, and I only could bet $250. So I thought to myself, what's the best way I can maximize profit on this $250? So I only bet one race to win, and it was good. It was 22 to 1. And then the next day it was the same thing. And I didn't win as much money, but I hit, you know, and I only played one race, and I was down to 2 races, and I was like, which one am I going to do? And luckily I picked the right one, because the other one, the horse ran up the track.
JK, what can you imagine? Knowing you, I can't imagine you looking at 3 cards and coming up with one play. Is it when you hear Scott talk about that, are you just shaking your head? I should be able to see, but I still see Scott's picture up there. Are you shaking your head hearing that? Is it something that you admire and wish you could emulate? How do you reconcile your go all in the third race strategy with the type of monastic discipline that Scott is describing?
Yeah, no, that's definitely tough. I mean, in a way, I sort of play that way when it's not a contest. I told you just now, I looked through Gulfstream, I looked through Fairgrounds, I looked through Tampa and Aqueduct to see if there is any like horse that I wanted to build a multi-race play around. It's not so much the sequence, it's the horses. And then I find the horse that I want to build it around, and then I see if I can find some value surrounding them to make that play happen. We've talked about it before. Like, I'm not interested in betting a 2 or 3 to 1 shot to win. I want to turn that 2 or 3 to 1 shot, who in my opinion is 9 to 5. I want to turn him into 6, 7, 8 to 1, and that's how I do it. I find the horse, then I find the horse. I work the sequence. So in a way, I am just looking for one opinion, and I'm building around it. So. But because I'm not a bet every race guy. If I'm at the racetrack,
the Breeders' Cup betting challenge, tell another tale, my friend.
Well, but I had opinions in those races.
Right. No, that's fair. That's a great point.
And it's easy, and I find myself having opinions in stakes races more because that's what we follow. Those are the horses I know the ins and the outs about. Those are the horses I know the ins and the outs about the horses they were facing. Yes. And I feel like my opinion is stronger when it comes to a Yoshida, a City of Light, a Roy H, than it is about a Frosty so-and-so running in New York in a New York bred stake or New York, claiming race or whatever.
Right. That makes sense. I'll allow it. I wanted to ask a question that sort of piggybacks on the conversation we had last week when we were comparing and contrasting the idea of the importance of strike rate, how often you cash, with the idea of long-term ROI. And I want to tie it together with the concept of being a public handicapper, not the contest specifically, not the site specifically, but the idea is if it's your job to give out picks to the public, do you feel like it's more important for that person what should your goal be as a public handicapper? Do you and I'll phrase it as a multiple choice to help get you guys' minds going, and I'll start with you, Scott. Would it be more important to you to have a good ROI at the end of the year? Would your strike rate be more important to you? Or would there be some other way that you'd want to measure yourself?
Well, to me, ROI obviously is that's what I would want to be judged on, and I want to have a higher. I'd rather be 3 for 20 and show a profit than 13 for 20 and show not profit. So that's the first thing. But the way I address that, and I think public handicappers out there can do this. They have the option to do this, where they're forced to make a pick, and it's a 4 to 5 horse, and they have to pick nobody else is going to win. So they pick the 4 to 5, but they say no bet on this race. So the way I handle it with public handicapper is, if I have a good price and I really like the horse, I'll say I'm going to crush this one on the win end and do an exacta box with another horse. And I will say that. And even though it's kind of hard to measure that, because if I hit with an 11-1, that's good. But the people who read you see that you said, I'm crushing this. And even though there's no direct way to measure it, like they don't know if crushing means you put 20 on it or 100 or 250. But at least that's a way of delineating your, being more nuanced in your position, which is the way I imagine if I was ever hired as a track handicapper, which I would love to be. That's the way I would do it, because you're forced to pick some races, whether it's a 5-horse field. What are you going to do when it's a 3 to 5? You can't help yourself. So then just say it's not worth betting, but this is the horse I like.
In theory, I agree with everything you're saying, but I will point out that as a public handicapper, a large part of the gig is giving ideas to people who aren't necessarily doing work on your own. I think about a meet like Saratoga. In that environment, I don't blame a handicapper for being a little bit more conscious of strike rate as well as ROI, just because in the exact example you gave, that 3 for 20 type, that type of percentage, it increases the chance that somebody might be there for a day and hit nothing. So it's interesting. It's an interesting debate to me if their job isn't. I mean, I agree. You wouldn't want them to give all no value winners either. But I do think I personally would be willing to compromise a little bit on my ROI to make sure we were giving out enough winners to keep that player like engaged and in action. It's a wonky rabbit hole I've led us down. JK, what do you think?
Well, I don't think there's a correct answer, right? I think that the public handicapper serves a lot of different purposes, and a lot of different purposes for a lot of different people and a lot of different types of players. And so I don't think that, and the opportunities that I've had to like do, whatever the Breeders' Cup stuff or the NYRA stuff, like I want, when I'm there, even on the show, when we do the podcast, I want to first and foremost attempt to educate. I don't want to say educate because maybe I'm not educating, but I want to attempt to give people ideas, to give people thoughts and experiences that I've had, and give my opinion of how I see a race unfolding. I don't want to be judged on my winners, not because I by any means am I like ashamed or don't think that I could have a positive ROI, but that's not how I bet. That's not how 90% of the people that participate pari-mutually bet. They don't just pick one horse and run. They're identifying sequences, and they're using 3 or 4 horses. They're seeing a pace scenario as potentially falling apart, and these are the 4 horses that are likely to pick up the pieces, and so on and so forth. So the idea of like being narrowed to one horse, I think it's a little bit misleading. I want to educate. I want to give winners when I can, and I want to give people ideas that they might not have come up with on their own.
That's well said. I definitely follow where both of you are coming from. I just thought that was an interesting way to connect those two discussions from the last show and this show before we move on to doing some actual handicapping. And I think that's what we'll do now. We're going to start off at the fairgrounds. We have a stakes-laden card at the fairgrounds. Lots of state-bred stuff. Scott, the first race you picked goes as the 11th. What can you tell me about this one?
These most of these races are, I think they're pretty handicapable. There's two horses that I think are going to be on the lead, or the 1-2. I think it's going to be Monty Man, who's the 7-5 favorite. I don't know if he'll go off that low, and Giacomo's Song. And there's really not very much speed in the race, so I see those two getting out there, winging it. I don't see what's going to compromise them. And I'm going to go with Giacomo because he's going to finally be a price. He won this race in 2015, and he's been working well, better than he has in years for the last, from September through November. So I think that, and he's getting 4 pounds from Monty Man, and he's 10-1 morning line. So those are the two that I like. The other ones don't particularly interest me. I'm actually a little bit against Divine Bean and Give Me a Minute. Divine Bean has only won as the favorite, and Give Me a Minute is 1 for 14, and that one win was at 1-20.
Interesting. I love the things you're pointing out that you're looking at, the clues a little bit deeper inside the DRF PPs, and Giacomo's Song, the 4 at 10-1 on the morning line for Mike Stidham, Scott's top choice in there. JK, how do you see this one?
Well, a lot of things. I think that Scott kind of brushed over a point that I've heard him talk about on a couple of, when we were on the panel at EquestriaCon, he talked about, which is, and I just wanted to give him an opportunity to kind of retouch on it after I give my pick, but that's about the differences in a horse's workout, where they've been working 49 in their past, but suddenly now they're working 47 with the same trainer. Scott's talked a lot about that as a clue, so a great point for Giacomo's Song. If I was going to be in New Orleans and I was going to dinner, I would definitely go with Giacomo's, one of my favorite restaurants in New Orleans, for lots of different reasons. I love Give Me a Minute. I think the horse is going to sit the pocket with Corey Lannery. I agree Monty Man and Giacomo's Song will kind of go on with it a little bit. I think they'll kind of pick up the pace a little bit out there. And with Corey Lannery, I think he'll sit right in there, come running late, tip out, long stretch there at Fairgrounds for that horse to be able to make up ground on those two horses. And then I thought the 9 horse, My Friend Flavin, was a little bit of an interesting long shot. Been off for quite a long time. Louisiana bred, finally shows back up here. He's won at Fairgrounds 3 times. So I think he's a longer price type you could probably use underneath, or if you're behind in a contest, something like that. But Give Me a Minute's my top pick.
I was going to mention My Friend Flavin if you didn't. Just seems to fit at a square price. Scott may be right about the pace scenario, and that could be an issue. But yeah, if you need to go longer end of the odds spectrum, couple of good options in there between the 4, Giacomo's Song, and the 9, My Friend Flavin. So let's pause on that point that JK brought up quickly. Scott, when you're making those analyses about improving workouts, are you looking at workout reports, or are you just simply looking at the times printed in the program, and is there still signal even in that basic information?
Yeah, I don't look at workout reports. Sometimes I do, but workout reports come out the night before. So if I'm handicapping ahead of time, I don't have that luxury anyway. So what I do with the formulator is I tell it to print all races. And I tell it with the settings, you can say merge workouts and also show every workout. So I do that, and then I transfer that to the iPad, because using Formulator on the computer, when you're showing all the workouts, it's kind of slow. There's just so much data. So I have it as a PDF on my iPad, and I just scroll through and I just look to see like if in the last 3 races its workouts have perked up, and if they have, then I look back into the past to see if they're the best ever, or like it's like first time in 3 years that they've been good. And I notate that. I have a piece of paper written down with all the horses that show that kind of improvement. Sometimes if the horse is only a second-time starter, it'll say like workouts are faster since its debut. And that doesn't mean that it's going to win. There's so many other factors. But when I see an angle I like, plus the positive workouts, then that can be actionable.
That's very interesting. I think it's something that not that many people are looking at. That it's very logical to me. There would be some signal in there. Cool.
And I will say that my friend Flavin, he's working out really great too. They're tied for his best works. So like that's notable, and I think he also definitely has a shot in this field because he actually won this race 2 years ago.
Subtle indicators of coming into form potentially there. Let's move on to the 12th. Now we've got fillies going 6 furlongs on the dirt. Scott, we'll keep it with you.
All right, this is a kind of a boring. It's not a great race because there's only 2 horses that look like they're gonna be in the. They're going to be in the exacta. That's Minute to Stardom, who's the 9-5 favorite, and Play Hours. It's Hours to Run, who's the 2-1 second choice. They're vastly faster than the rest of the field. I would go with Minute to Stardom because just based on the way I handicap, Hours to Run is going to bounce off her lifetime best last race, which is she's running on very short rest for her, and she's carrying 6 more pounds than Minute to Stardom. So Minutes to Stardom may be some value just because they'll be playing Hours to Run. And I won't be betting the race, but if it was any kind of contest, like mythical or even live bankroll, I would send it in on Minute to Stardom.
Interesting. And that's another example that grading horses against themselves, mentioning, okay, it's back quick, it's 20 days, that's back quick for this horse. I assume you're getting some of those ideas from cheat methodology, which I know is something else in addition to DRF that you look at. Yeah, and if I wasn't looking at sheets, I would be looking at numbers. I would be looking at buyers, and the rest. So like can a horse put 2 together? Can a horse win 2 good races in a row? And if so, was there 5 weeks in between there or 3 weeks? If they can do it, I think the Monty man is more than, he just ran a big race and he can run another big race because he's done it before. But in the case of Hours to Run, she hasn't done it before. JK, what do you think about this one?
I think Scott and I have our first head-to-head ever, where he can we can maybe put up an adult beverage out in Vegas at the NHC. It sounds like that'll be probably the next time we'll be around each other in person. But I love Hours to Run here for a few reasons. One of the other reasons I recommend that people use 2 sets of speed figures, whatever you decide to use, whether it's Beyer and Timeform or whatever you decide to do. Obviously, mine is Timeform. For one, I'm not a big bounce guy in the first place, but here's what I will say about Hours to Run. Hours to Run ran a 108 Timeform last time, closing into blue fractions. The race prior to that was a 107. So even of that methodology, if you wanted to subscribe to that, that's kind of a match of sorts. And so I expect the horse can improve second off while the other horse, Minute to Stardom, is coming off of like a 126-day break. And then if you look back in Hours to Run's PPs, if you look to December 8th of 2017, horse ran a 92 Timeform US, comes back in 24 days, runs a 101 and wins by 4. And that's all under Larry Jones. So Larry Jones understands what that he did with that horse in those 24 days to get him to improve his figure 9 points. If he makes the same improvement here, the horse is going to be extremely tough to beat. I like Hours to Run quite a bit.
For the record, Scott, do you accept JK's head-to-head of an adult beverage in Las Vegas on these 2?
I accept the adult beverage, and I don't know if he's JK. Are you going to be at the Pegasus?
I will be at the Pegasus.
All right. Well, we can settle matters then.
Oh, turns out I'm going to miss the Pegasus. I'm back on. I guess I did okay at the Breeders' Cup. I'm going to be back on UK TV that weekend, which will be a lot of fun. But I am a little sad I won't get to hang out with you guys at the Swanky Pegasus. That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. I assume you will both be participating in the contest.
I put up my 12K.
JK, you wouldn't miss that one.
I was actually going to be where you were, but that suddenly has canceled. So I think I am going to actually be at the Pegasus.
You were going to be in the UK that weekend?
There was a weird way I was going to go. My brother was going to be there. I was thinking about going, and then I made a switch. I made a switch back, so I'm going to play.
Are you going to be checking out the famous MK New Year's Eve shows in London?
There's a small plan to do so. I went before he got really popular, and in one night he played 3 shows. So like he played at midnight, and then we went somewhere else. He played at 2, and then he played at 4, and we were just like going from spot to spot in a Sprinter van. It was very fun.
That's phenomenal. I'd love to. I gotta see him someday. All right, let's move on to the West Coast, and we're gonna start with the other 2 public handicapper races, and then we'll go down south to Los Al for some Grade 1 action. But let's start off with another stake race. We've got mile and a 16th up perf. And I like this rhythm we've been in. Scott, we'll keep teeing things up.
Okay. In this race, I am going to read out this would be a very good test race. I should know that I'm a big fan of Golden Gate when they have fields, which they do. They have a 12 race card on Saturday with only the first race has less than 8 entries. So it's pretty tremendous field, and I look forward to handicapping and playing the whole thing. But another reason I love Golden Gate, it's always been good to me contest-wise, and in the NHC I hit a 25-1 and a 12-1 consecutively at Golden Gate, which got me to the final table.
That's awesome.
So there's a lot of opportunity at Golden Gate because they tend to overbet favorites, and this isn't something I'm going to pound. Depending on the odds, I might put something on it, but I'm going to go with Savannah Slew, who's in the rail spot at 20-1. She ran higher of 5, is 4th, and Sweet Cherry runs anywhere from the 80 to a 90. So if Savannah Slew can run her best from the inside, she's inside speed, and she's got a trainer who's really hitting on all cylinders, like 26%, and she's 2 for 3 of the distance. So I think she's going to go off at 20-1, and I think she can win the race. And that'll be my public handicapper play. And if I'm in any kind of contest, I'll put her in there.
I love the pick, but I worry that I think the price will be square, but I do not think you will get all of the 20 just because looking at the time form pace figures, she just looks to have such a clear lead. And it just feels like those type of horses that used to be all of 20-1 in the modern day, you get half that if you're lucky. And this race also adding to that potential edge, time form has favoring horses on or near the early lead, but I like the pick very much, and I wonder. It's really interesting because Golden Gate really noticeably overplays favorites, and I wonder how involved the computers are with Golden Gate. Yeah,
I don't know. I've never really given it any thought, but I would think that they're less involved because with 5 and 6 horse fields, there must be less opportunity. But it always amazes me at the prices that show up at Golden Gate, even if it's a 6 horse field. Sometimes an 8-1 goes off at 25-1, so that there's still opportunity.
It'll be interesting to see what the crowd does with Sweet Charity, the 6-5 morning line favorite. JK, who did you land on?
Yeah, this is one of those races where, like, I get it. I wanted, Time Form US had it favors horses on or near the lead. I was looking for that pace horse, and it is probably going to be Savannah Slew. The 4 Birdie Gold also can be forwardly placed a little bit as well. But then as I started digging a little bit deeper, I noticed that Savannah Slew is just not that fast, has been facing obviously much easier company. Sweet Charity was in a stake down at Del Mar, was closing into blue fractions off a 265-day layoff. Now is going to get I understand the one's loose, but the one, has a lot of red in her time form U.S. pace figures. She should go on with it. She's not going to go out there and go 49. I think she'll just keep the pace honest. It might be a one horse fair pace. And I just think Sweet Charity is just too good, closing into those blue fractions, facing better. This is an opportunity that in a contest setting, win place or whatever, if I was forced to play this race, I would just take the $4 or $5 or whatever it is. And I think Sweet Charity is going to be extremely tough just on class. We talk about the time form race ratings and how we kind of understand where they've come from. We've had Craig talk about the Milkowski a little bit. There's not an exact science to it. It's not something I live or die by, but I take a peek at it. And Sweet Charity ran third, closing into slow fractions off a long layoff in a 120 rated race. This is a 109, and no one else in here is really close to that. I just think she's better than them.
Just to make clear which numbers in time form JK is talking about, because we talk about a lot of them on here. The race ratings are the ones you would see in the PP all the way to the left. They're an evaluation of the class of the previous races, essentially, not to be confused with either the raw speed figure for the individual horse or the performance racing for the individual horse, which you will find over towards the right under the end of the running line and then next to that. This is one, every horse that came out of that November 9th race at Del Mar in that same spot, you'll see 120. That's a rating of the race itself. And it is a really interesting and I find useful, quick and dirty class evaluating tool, one of the many benefits of Timeform US. Let's move on to, it's the 9th race is the next one, right, Scott?
Yes.
We are still on the turf. We are $50,000 stake, and we're 1 mile and a 16th for 3-year-olds and up. And who's it going to be here, Scott?
Yeah, it's actually a split field, two divisions of one race. So they actually got 18 horses to enter into this race.
Pretty cool.
This is one where I'm kind of reaching a little bit, but I am interested in Bernina Star, who I believe also is on the rail. The horse has run in all kinds of stakes since she was a 2-year-old. And they've run her on dirt and turf, and she has always acquitted herself. She's run the same figures on turf as she has on dirt. And she ran the best dirt race of her life in June 22nd, where she hit an 87 Beyer. And she's circling back to that, and she's never run that fast on turf. But I think, she can, and if she does, especially from the rail, and assuming she doesn't get into traffic, she can win this race at a price. Now, she's only 6-1 morning line, but on Public Handicapper, she's showing up at 9-1, and I see, it's another one of these Golden Gate things. I see the horse going off at like 15. So that's my play, but I would also exact a box Bernina Star with Psycho Sister, who's 4 for 6 at Golden Gate.
Let's explain what you mean, Scott, when you talk about those Public Handicapper odds. That's another great tool that you can avail yourself of. Regular
PHers know this, but if there's any Public Handicapper race and you're interested in finding out how the race, the odds may play out, if you go to our odds page where there's a button on publichandicapper.com right in the middle near the top, odds, and you'll see how many people picked the horse. Now, it's only one person per pick, so you don't know. It doesn't account for people betting $1,000 versus $10. But the odds are pretty accurate. They're pretty close to what the final odds actually go off at.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that would hold up. Thinking, everybody's a wise guy, on Public Handicapper comparatively to the market. But it's interesting to show that there's some common thread in the nature of crowds between your PH subsection of the audience and the actual betting market. And over the years, you've noticed that it has some predictive value.
Yeah, and Bernina Star, actually, I just noticed is now up to 11-1. And what happens is the long shots on Public Handicapper tend to get longer, just like in the odds before the race. A horse might open at 10-1, but as the smart in the race, that horse can drift up to 20-1, and that's why I'm making Bernina Star my pick, because I think that she's going to be higher than that 6-1, and not only because of Public Handicapper, but that is definitely one of the reasons why.
No, it makes sense. JK, where are we here?
I agree with Bernina Star. She makes a ton of sense, kind of for the same reasons that I'm going to pick the 5 Fizzy Friday for Phil D'Amato with Aaron Greider. See, I kind of think that Psycho Sister is one of those horses that might inherit the lead, but isn't like a blazer. Her last races, she had blue fractions, didn't finish. She has a few red pace figures in there, but doesn't necessarily have to go out there and really cook it up. I think that Fizzy Friday coming out of the sprints will kind of sit in that garden trip, second or third. The 4 will probably be loose. And I think they'll probably not go too quick. And I think that what happens in those situations, if you can find a horse that's kind of a sprinter, has that turn of foot to keep up going 5 or 6.5 down the hill, if they can get easy enough fractions and stay in position and kind of turn it into we've heard this a lot of before, a sprint for home, I think there's an edge there with that turn of foot that you can see from some of these sprinters that are stretching out. I think you have to be careful not falling on these late running sprinters, assuming that they're going to stretch all the way out. But I think Fizzy Friday is interesting at a little bit of a price.
All right.
I have some good news for you, Jonathan.
You tell.
When I first looked at this race, I wrote very large on the first sheet in the on my iPad. I wrote Fizzy Friday! ! Then I changed my pick to Bernina Star because Fizzy Friday is 0 for 3 at the distance and never even been third. So and that with her 7-2 morning line odds, that's why I made the switch. But generally I do not advocate making the switch. So I'll probably regret it.
Does that give you any pause, that record at the distance?
No, it's funny. My PP say that she won at the distance and ran third twice.
Whoa.
Well, that's a weird discrepancy. I'm going to let you, JK, look into that while we move on to talk about the low.
I think it is.
You got it figured out already?
I think it might just be the PBs I'm looking at might have, if it's within a 16th of a mile, I think they might count it as the same distance.
Okay, that's a good guess. And
she's won at a mile, she's run second at a mile, she run third at a mile. I think that's probably the difference.
So you're saying it's mile and a 16th. That's close enough for you, Scott. That's not necessarily close enough for you.
Really, once I saw the 7-1, I was all excited about Fizzy Friday. Right. Once I saw the 7-2 morning line, I was like, what can I do to beat this horse? Yeah. So when I see that 0 for 3, the mile and a mile 16th can make a difference. So, that's why I did that. I'm normally, I think if this was the final table NHC, I don't know if I would hold that. I'm not sure. It's borderline. Jonathan.
JK, you're seeing a different price. How do you have these? You have PPs from like another universe or something here.
On time form US, she's 8-1 morning line.
Well, that's a big difference. So I don't know. We've confused you. Now that we've thoroughly confused you, we've got 5 minutes left. We've got 2 Grade 1 races to talk about.
Yeah. So, here's my confusion. My confusion is I was looking at the Public Handicapper odds, so I think the horse might get played.
Okay, that makes
yeah. No, at 8-1, I may be back on Fizzy Friday. I'll put it this way: I'm definitely exacta boxing Bernina Star and Fizzy Friday.
I like it. Let's go to Los Al. I don't want to run over too much today. We can run over a little as long as AJ doesn't immediately text me and tell me that we can't. Let's talk about this Los Al Futurity. JK, you are our Southern California correspondent. We're going to make you talk first about both these races. Who do you like in here?
In the Futurity, the boys version, I think like 2 horses could win, Improbable and Mucho Gusto. If I had to pick one, I would pick Mucho Gusto. The rail is not where you want to be at Los Al. Improbable has the big race at Churchill, will obviously be over bet. I would go with Mucho Gusto from the outside. Remember, I believe in this race is the race for Solomini ended up beating McKenzie. We know who was better overall in that fight. It doesn't necessarily mean that the most talented horse on the day will get it done. Mucho Gusto for me.
Okay. And do we want to mention the idea publicly that I mentioned off air?
Which one was it?
We have this big show number coming up, JK. I thought there might be a. We'll leave it vague. There might be a special surprise, a special guest for the listeners potentially. Show number 400, who just happened to come up after we looked at this race. Scott, which Baffert are you picking?
Well, I would go with the same. I'm in agreement with Jonathan here. Mucho Gusto has a small improvement from first to second race, and is a little bit slower. So I'm always going to play that because Mucho Gusto could run a gigantic race, off that small improvement, whereas the one horse Improbable ran a big improvement and could continue to do that, but the value's not going to be there. So Mucho Gusto, I don't know if he'll be as high as 2-1, but that would be my play as well.
We'll quickly move on to the Starlet, the other 2-year-old Grade 1. JK, I think I know who you're going to pick in here, even though your man Baffert and your Silver Wig have the two morning line favorites once again. After your man Mike McCarthy got it done from you from the rail with City of Light in the dirt mile, I assume you're sticking right on the McCarthy bandwagon with Vibrance, bad rail or no. Am I correct?
Yeah, funny, I don't think Mother's that good. She probably runs off the screen now. It hurts my heart. I don't think Chasing Yesterday is that good. The tap at half to American Pharaoh. They're both obviously going to be bet. Mother for her performance at Churchill, Chasing Yesterday because of her pedigree and the performances that she's had already to this point.
What's your knock on Chasing Yesterday?
I just don't. She just hasn't run that quickly. Her biggest race was at 5.5 and at 6. The 7 furlong races leave a little bit to be desired. Now she's going to be stretching out for the first time. She's going to be extremely overbet from the 2-year-old stats for Baffert. Winning at like 50%. It's Baffert. It's American Pharaoh's half. Overbet. I'm going to get Vibrance as the third choice, and I know she drew the rail, but it's Flavian Pratt. She comes running late. She'll take back, get off the rail, and she'll be swooping in the middle of the field, making her run. She won't end up staying down there like I think in the one horse in the one horse in the Baffert race earlier. So I like Vibrance.
The one horse in the Baffert. Probable.
I can do that. I can start a sentence and remember the horse's name, but I couldn't do it that time. Improbable.
Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, Vibrance could absolutely win the race. The 5-2 morning line doesn't get me excited about that. So I think gun to my head, and I'm not. This isn't a public handicapper race. I'm not playing the race. I'll watch it on TV later in the day. But I would go with Mother. The pattern is there. Hasn't really improved dramatically, and likewise, like Jonathan said, Chasing Yesterday is going to take a ton of money. So if Mother is 2-1, then that's the play.
Yeah, gun to my head, I'd go with Mother as well. I think Vibrance might be the better bet long term, but I'm just a little worried about maybe I'm making too much of it, but I'm a little worried about the rail and think Mother will be able to cut out the sort of wide forward trip. But I mean, obviously, it's going to be a fascinating race, short field, but very interesting. Definitely worth checking that one out. 6:28 p.m. That's going to be 6:28 Pacific time? Yes.
No, that'll be Eastern time.
Oh, that's Eastern time. Great.
Yeah.
It'll be right in the midst of everything. Fantastic. So be enjoyable to watch some Grade 1 action from Los Al, some competitive racing from around the country, and that is all the time we have on this 391st edition of the DRF Players Podcast. Thank you so much, Scott Carson. Thank you so much, JK, for taking time out of your days to do this show with me. Thanks to producer AJ as well, ably filling in for producer Craig. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. You make the show a lot of fun to do. Going to have some really fun stuff coming up. Guests next week include Richard Migliori and Barbara Livingston, making her long overdue debut appearance on the pod. Actually, both of them making their overdue appearances on the pod. Week after that, we're going to do listener questions, Listener Appreciation Week once again, which is basically me being lazy and saying, hey, why don't you guys program the show? Get your questions ready for Listener Appreciation Week. Send them to podcast@drf.com or hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Looms Boldly, Scott at Carsoni PH, JK, of course, Bleeding Orange at UT Big Hair. We will be back on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornital. May you win all your photos.